So I'll speak about Byteball. First, I'll say why this project exists, what it brings to the world. Then I'll say about how it is actually achieved, what makes it possible. Byteball is Byteball is about the economy. It is designed to enable contracts that allow P2P contracts between parties that don't know each other, which we call smart contracts. First, we'll talk about the contracts as we know them. In contracts, there are usually two parties, and they have respectively rights and obligations toward each other. For example, in a sale contract, a buyer has a right to obtain an item, and the seller has the obligation to provide it, and the buyer has the reciprocal obligation to pay for it, while the seller has the right to receive the money. The nice property of the contracts is that in contracts, both parties benefit from them. They receive more than they give to the contract. For example, if you want to get in a taxi from a city center to an airport, and you hire a taxi driver, then what you give to the contract to the driver, you give the money, is less than what you receive. You receive more freedom of movement, while the driver, in his perception, he receives more in money than he gives in the time that he spends. The system works good if both parties do what they promise to do, but there is a danger that a party of the contract may try to receive but not give. That's why we need a way to enforce the contracts, to make certain that the contracts execute exactly as the parties agreed. Currently, there are three methods of enforcement that are currently used. First is reputation. You know in advance what to expect from a contract. Second is the law. If the contract is breached, you can use the court system to enforce the other party to do what was promised, actually it is rarely used because both parties know about that, and the threat of an action but by a powerful third party of the state keeps them responsible. And the third option is trusted third parties, which became very popular lately, and they act essentially as a private judge, but more efficient than the state judge. Once these enforcement mechanisms start to work, it becomes a very powerful thing. It encourages creation of value because both parties win in their subjective view from the contract. It becomes a positive sum game. And once this positive sum games begins, value gets created. We started with the basic freedom of movement. Then we went on to create more value once we started the loop of value creation, and building higher and higher levels of value and building more degrees of freedom. We eventually built our modern economy and enabled new degrees of freedom, including the greater freedom to move our bodies. However, with the current enforcement mechanisms, there are several problems. For example, with reputation, reputation doesn't work good when a new player enters a business. Reputation, when he has no reputation at all, it works against him. In this enforcement mechanism also there is no privacy because with reputation we need stable identities. And ratings also can be faked. The law is expensive, it is slow, it also offers no privacy, and there is a degree of uncertainty about the outcomes. Trusted third parties, they have to escrow full amounts of all the contracts in order to enforce them, and they get actually more power than they need to enforce the contracts. This gives them disproportionate power and centralizes the system dangerously around these single points of failure. So there is a room for improvement. It would be fine to there are some niches that are completely unserved by the system, for example, new players who have no reputation. And also the existing enforcement mechanisms can be made better, can be made significantly better by making them more certain, faster, and cheaper. And this is what Byteball does. It enables safe contracts that can be trusted to execute exactly as agreed upon, and it allows to serve niches that were uncovered previously. And first of all, it is new players who have no reputation, and it is significantly cheaper, faster, and more certain than what the other mechanisms provide, even when the other mechanisms work. Byteball is a distributed ledger that is without blocks. With blocks, there are several problems that make it worthwhile to get rid of them. First of all, in blockchains, we have two basic entities, the blocks and the transactions, and it would be fine to simplify the design by having only one entity. Second, with blockchains, we have complex relationship between blocks and transactions, some variables that need to be balanced. For example, how large are the blocks, how long is the delay between blocks, and most importantly, who is allowed to create the block. And it would be better to have systems without gatekeepers, without those who get to decide what is included in the blocks and what is not. So that's why in Byteball we got rid of the blocks and we connected transactions directly to each other, which is a structure that is known as a directed acyclic graph. Each new transaction references one or several previous transactions, which forms the DAG. In directed acyclic graph, we don't have to put all transactions into blocks and then put blocks one after another and put them all on the same lane. In DAGs, we have more parallelism, and with this parallelism, we can achieve more scalability, which dynamically adapts to the current requirements in throughput. In Byteball, there is also no proof of work. We want the system to provide value to the outside world rather than consume resources. That's why there's also no proof of work. So in DAG, once a new transaction is added to the system, it becomes immediately visible to the peers, and when the peers create the transactions, they reference the previous transactions as a parent, and the original transaction gets new child transactions that reference it. So in DAG, it is very fast that we receive some form of recognition from peers that our transaction exists. Then the child transactions get their own child transactions, and the number of confirmations grows like snowball. That explains ball in Byteball. But these confirmations are only confirmations of that the transaction exists. It is not yet a confirmation that the transaction is not a double spend. So we need a way to resolve double spends, and DAG helps in this a lot, because in DAG there is already a partial order between transactions, and if we have two conflicting transactions and they can be, one transaction is reachable from another through directed links through directed links on the DAG, we can immediately reject the transaction that comes later. But what happens if the two conflicting transactions, the double spends, there is no partial order between them, as like in this picture? To resolve double spends in this case, we assume that there is a trusted set of users, we call them witnesses, which are expected to post transactions only in order, which means that their consequent transactions are reachable, one is reachable from another through directed links on the DAG, through parent-child links. So they allow to post transactions only serially, but they are not allowed to, or rather not expected to post transactions that fork their path, like in this picture. So once we have these users, we call them witnesses, we can create a chain, we call it main chain, through we call it on the DAG, which goes through the maximum number of transactions posted by witnesses. It is drawn in bold on the picture. This chain, it gravitates to transactions posted by witnesses. And then we can order other transactions around this order, which is established by the main chain. If a transaction is not on the main chain itself, it can reach the main chain through other links on the DAG, and the point where it reaches it through the shortest path is the place of this transaction on the main chain. And if we have two transactions that are conflicting, we just compare their positions on the main chain, and the conflicting transaction which comes later is rejected, is not rejected, but it is deemed void, while the transaction which comes earlier is deemed valid. The later transaction, which is deemed void, still stays on the DAG, but the coin movements, the spends of the coins that it attempted to produce are just ignored. The witness system which we use in Byteball can be compared to checkpointing authorities which are known from other cryptocurrencies. For example, in Peercoin, in IOTA, there are checkpoints that are posted centrally by the developers of these coins, and they are trusted to choose the right history of previous transactions. In Byteball, and in this system, there is only one checkpointing authority, which makes it a single point of failure. In Byteball, we have 12 witnesses, which essentially play approximately the same role. Witnesses are very important for establishing an order of transactions, and consequently for resolving double spends. That's why it's very important to choose witnesses to minimize the chances of failure. Witnesses are trusted to post only serially. That's why that is one transaction after another. They are chosen by users, which enables replacement of witnesses one by one if a witness loses its trust. They are redundant, so that a minority of witnesses can fail and we're still okay. And the most important is that if a witness misbehaves, it is supposed to lose something large in the real world, not just in the internal economy. The latter means that the security of the system is based on value that exists in the real world. They have something, witnesses, they have something in the real world that they can lose. It is a sort of a security bond that they have in the real world. And the size of this bond is not dependent on the internal economy that exists in Byteball. It is completely independent of this internal economy where witnesses do earn some fees, but this is really not important for security. What is in the real world outside the system is most important. And this absence of reliance on the internal economy makes Byteball different from other currencies where from other crypto platforms where they have an internal economy, and the validators, the miners, they have in proof of work currencies, for example, they have block reward in the native currency. In proof of stake currencies, they have voting power, staking power in the internal currency. This means that if there is a situation when the native currency, there is a native currency and there is a token or several tokens which are issued on the platform, and if the value of the native currency is less than the value of a token, the system can be the value of the token can be easily attacked by those who own the native currency. In Byteball, there is no the internal economy is not so important for security, and the security rests on the value in the real world. Next, about the native currency that exists in Byteball. Everyone who uses the system gets something from using it. They have a verification of their transactions by all the peers, and so all the peers verify what they receive, what they spend, and ultimately the peers agree about your final balance on the platform. The peers also verify the contracts that happen on the platform. So it is something that people would be prepared to pay for, and the natural estimate for, and it would be logical to pay for the service that the network provides, that the payment is proportional to the consumed resources. And the consumed resources is the size of the transaction that is stored on the distributed ledger. And the size of the transaction is stored, measured in bytes, and that's why we decided that the transaction fee is equal to 1 byte, and the currency is called also byte, so that 1 byte of currency allows you to store 1 byte of data on the distributed ledger. How much is 1 byte in fiat currency depends on the actual demand on the service that the currency, that the platform provides. And the demand is ensured by smart contracts that run on the platform. Smart contracts they are just regular contracts which are encoded in machine-readable form and stored on distributed ledger, so that everyone, all the peers, can verify these contracts. But it is not enough to just be able to verify them. It is also important for users who use the contracts to be able to see what the contract means. That's why the smart contracts in Byteball are written in very simple declarative language, which is not Turing complete. It is not as powerful as other languages, but it can be translated to human-readable form so that end users can actually see what the contract means. And the contract is just a set of constraints that say when and who can spend the balance which is locked on the contract. So since everybody can see what the contract means, they don't need to be developers, and they don't need to trust developers to know that the contract works as expected. Let's consider one example of a contract, a flight delay insurance contract. For example, we want to make an insurance against flight delay. We have the insured and the insurer. They both pay their respective shares to the contract. For example, the insured pays 10%, while the insurer pays 90%. And the contract says that it can be unlocked if it can be unlocked by the insured if the flight is delayed by more than 1 hour, or by the insurer if the delay is less than 1 hour. And the contract also references a trusted data provider, an Oracle, who is expected to provide true and accurate data about the actual delay of this flight. And both parties trust this Oracle. This contract is readable by end users. Users can see and verify that it acts as expected. And also the users can compose this contract directly in the wallet, in Byteball wallet, so they don't need to be developers even to create contracts. The nice thing about these contracts is that they can be trusted to execute exactly as agreed upon, because the terms and conditions of the contract are verified by all the peers on the network, and they make sure that all the spending conditions were met when the contract is unlocked. So what is different about enforcement by smart contracts? It is that no reputations are required, no real names are required for this enforcement. It is fully automatic, it is inexpensive, it is fast, and it is P2P friendly. So we have the fourth method of contract enforcement, of which smart contracts allow new players to give them the freedom to make contracts with anybody in completely peer-to-peer manner, even when they don't know the peers. they can do P2P contracts and be confident that the contract executes as expected. And P2P is what crypto is about from the first day. So contracts is a social thing. We need at least two users to make a contract, and these two users must be with complementary interests at the same time. So we need really many users to get this off the ground. That's why we created a wallet that is really very easy to use, and because we have to make the barrier to entry for users to be as low as possible. That's why I created the wallet that is very easy to use, and we did a few things that are a few things differently. For example, most contracts are exposed in the wallet as chatbots, and it is very easy for developers to develop these contracts, and for users it is very easy to interact with them because they can do it in the familiar chat interface. We have Bot Store, which is a collection of bots, chatbots. It is similar to App Store, which makes it, which gives developers a platform for distribution of their apps, and for users a way to discover new applications. And we also distribute the main currency bytes for free to make the barriers to entry low. And there is one more thing. I think you remember PKPay, ChangeTip. These projects allowed anybody to send. This project allowed to send bitcoins to anybody who had a Twitter account in PKPay or a Reddit account, even if the recipient didn't have a Bitcoin wallet. And we want to make it really easy for users to begin using a cryptocurrency. And in the next version of our wallet, users will be able to send coins to email. They don't need to use cryptic addresses. They just type the email address of the recipient where they would normally type their Byteball address. And the recipient just receives an email with a link. He clicks this link, and the payment amount is instantly added to his account, to his balance. So crypto doesn't have to be cryptic. This feature will be released on December 8th in the next release of our wallet. That's it about Byteball. Thank you.
Yeah, real quick question. When it comes to the verifiers, you described that there was a specific main chain, then there are deviances from that, and then you have checkpoints distributed amongst that. Now, with older systems, there might be only one checkpoint, but here there's, for example, 12 you referenced. So with this system and potential scalability, don't those checkpoints create an issue of a type of a funnel effect? So even though there are 12, but in order to get the verification standards for security, if this were to become much larger, wouldn't you create funnels at each one of those checkpoints?
Do you want to say that it is a very low number?
Sorry, what?
Do you want to say it is a very low number, 12?
Can you repeat the question?
So the question is, I didn't quite understand it.
Oh, sorry, that's my fault. I'll happily repeat. So with the description of how the transactions are processed, they're not sent in blocks, they're sent in individual transaction bytes. So they're much smaller, much faster volume, and more distributed as far as their threads. But there's still a, please correct me when I'm wrong, that there's a main thread throughout this chain of events, and amongst that are distributed checkpoints to verify consistency and security. But with those distributed checkpoints, you reference that there are 12 in your system, adding greater security, opposed to other systems where there's one, or I assume smaller numbers as well. But with this setup, with 12 checkpoints or more or fewer, however, don't each one of those checkpoints, as you approach the scalability of this, present issues of bottleneck actions? So as you get a tremendous number of volumes of trades moving in these small little pieces, they hit these checkpoints and they have to go through but so many of these checkpoints before they can be verified, and therefore creating a bottleneck effect of transactions hitting ostensibly a type of gatekeepers. And also, is that not a sort of centralizing within a conceptually decentralized system?
Okay, the question is about, there is a concern that these checkpoints create, all transactions have to go through them, and it could create a bottleneck to slow down the confirmations. Well, when we have more transactions, we also have more frequent posting by witnesses. So we have the amount of time we have to wait for confirmations is approximately, we can roughly estimate when about the majority of witnesses, 7 witnesses, they post their transactions 1 or 2 times after your transaction. If there are more transactions, they are incentivized to post more frequently because they also want to earn transaction fees, and they earn them when they do post. If they don't post, the transaction fees are divided by among witnesses which do post. So when we have larger demand for transactions, larger frequency of transactions, witnesses also post more frequently, and their confirmation latency in fact decreases when we have more transactions.
Sorry, are witnesses the same as checkpoints, or are those 2 different concepts within this concept?
They are like checkpoints. It is not a very accurate analogy. Just you rely on them to see what is the right version of history. If you have 2 alternative histories, you can look at them and see if there's one version with witnesses, another version without witnesses. You immediately see that the version with witnesses is the right one. And when you build the main chain will go through the sub-DAG, the portion of DAG which has a high density of transactions posted by witnesses.
May I ask a follow-up question? Is that allowed? Okay, so I am. No one said no. So the way I interpret that is you have a main chain that actually has some majority of witnesses, or a certain line in the sand per se of verifying abilities that is embraced, but therefore there are also a increased number of additional chains also processing transactions that could potentially have no witnesses. And so if there is a transaction that occurs without witnesses, that is held to a lower standard than one off of the main chain, or one maybe with half as many witnesses. And so therefore you could have a trade with half the witnesses competing against a trade with full witness visibility against the main chain. Is that correct?
Well, the concern is about the transactions which are not on the main chain. How fast are they verified, correct?
Well, the competing nature of the main chain to the submissive chains, the alternative chains of events, because at some point I'd imagine the other chains would have to converge with the main chain for it to become ingrained.
They just converge. They converge very frequently. They are, as you saw in the pictures of the deck, there is very many forks and mergers. Very many intersections. So every transaction, which even if it didn't happen to be on the main chain, it reaches the main chain very fast through other transactions. So in a DEG, we have some sort of cooperation when other users help to bring your transaction to the main chain.
Okay, so transactions could bounce around these other chains until enough witnesses are required to then join the main chain, and then the transaction is actually completed? There's
Can you repeat,
one true chain?
Can you repeat, please?
I'm sorry, yeah, next question. I'll ask later. Sorry.
Thanks for your talk, Tony. I think you barely scratched the surface about the incredible possibilities that this system has. I got about a dozen of questions. I'll just stick with one for now. The number of witnesses, because it's 12, and the main chain, if I understood correctly, is defined by the chain that's got the most, that includes the most, that includes transactions by a majority of witnesses. So that's in this case 7.
Yes.
Because 12 is actually divisible by a lot of numbers, like 2, 3, 4, and 6. Isn't it a risk that at some point there are 2, well, competing chains that both have got 6 transactions by 6 witnesses, or 3 chains, or 4, or 6? Wouldn't it be better to have like 13 or any other prime number of witnesses?
Well, it can happen temporarily, but to make a make chain, to reach transaction stability, to reach finality, we need the majority of the witnesses on the main chain. So if the witnesses split into halves, neither of them has a majority, and this is a scenario where the deck cannot continue. We need at least a majority, that is 7 witnesses, to continue to operate and to include all other transactions when they add their own transactions, and so to merge all the forks that can appear.
Okay, but what is the incentive, or what is the reason why it will eventually merge? I mean, what happens if there are like 2 chains, both not the main chain because they both only got 6 witnesses? What's the incentive, or what's the reason why they will eventually merge?
It is the transaction fees, and every user has the same incentive to merge as many forks as can appear.
If I understand correctly, if there are 2 forks, there is a natural incentive for any witness or any user to merge with the other chain in order to
Exactly, because they earn a portion of the fees from these transactions that they are first to merge.
From the part of the fork that they are adding to the machine.
Yes, yes. Whenever you are extending the DAG, you have the chance to earn a portion of the fees that were paid by your direct parents.
Thank you.
For the talk, I think I also share his view that this is really an interesting idea. I have several questions I would like to know. But let me just ask one question which was on one of your slides. You said if the witnesses misbehave, they get a loss on the real economy. Can you explain that? Because somehow I didn't really get that.
Okay, the question is how the witnesses lose what they have if they misbehave. Well, just as an example, assume you're a big company and your business is based on trust. So you would be a good candidate to be a witness, because if your business is based on trust and you lie in this network, you also lose your reputation in all other areas where you are involved. So you're supposed to lose in your other businesses not connected with Byteball when you lie only once on Byteball network. And whatever you do on Byteball is quite transparent. It would be immediately visible if you misbehave.
So you're basically saying because Byteball is transparent,
yes,
you get that type of that effect that you get punished on the real wallet.
Yes.
Okay. And on the last point you made that you can send Byteball to emails. I mean, that can happen with any currency, I believe, but my view is that the reason that doesn't happen is because of security reasons. So are you just ignoring security in this case, or what is your view in relation to this approach to send Byteball to emails?
Okay, the question is about sending coins through email. There is a concern that it is not completely secure. Yes, it is. It is not completely secure, and it is not encouraged for large amounts. Essentially, what you do when you send coins through email, you send. Let me show you. Just look at this link. You send what you send is a BIP39 mnemonic, a 12-word mnemonic to the other person. And what they do, they sort of restore a wallet and spend from it. So it is transmitted through email or through chat message. You can also do it through text message, through WhatsApp, Telegram, Viber, whatever. And well, if your chat message is not encrypted, yes, somebody can see it and intercept your coins. So it is recommended to use it only to send small amounts and to use encrypted channels, such as encrypted chats, Signal, WhatsApp.
Can I just make a small comment? a feature like this is really useful to get other people involved with the project, and I agree with you. You shouldn't use this for large amounts, but just giving away tips or small pocket change in order to get people into the project. There's another Byteball user, he's been active on Slack and Telegram, and he created a Byteball bot where you can actually print vouchers to give away, and people can scan that with a QR code and you know, start with a few bytes. We actually brought some with us, so we're happy to deal them out if anyone is interested. It's another example of the flexibility of the Byteball infrastructure. So this guy created a bot, and I, as a Byteball user, can use this bot to create my own vouchers and deal them out. So that's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One last question, anyone? So what I would like to say, when what? When are we in the App Store? When is Byteball in the App Store?
Well, it's a difficult question. I think many of you know that Apple App Store is very cautious about cryptocurrencies. There is a very small number of cryptocurrencies which are allowed. We are working on it, but at the moment they didn't allow us yet.
So we're going to continue the discussion with Tony at the bar. We're going to be here until about midnight or so with some special conversations that are on the agenda in terms of how to grow the Byteball ecosystem. In particular, for example, the number of witnesses and initiatives like what was just discussed here. What I think personally I find really interesting is the spirit of innovation. It's just the first year of Byteball, and there's a lot happening, and with a lot of energy and a lot of ideas about bringing it forward. So those of us who want to stay, the bar will be open until midnight for us to plot what the next steps are for Byteball. So let's give Tony a big round of applause. And thanks.